It's a pleasure. We welcome William Nicholson, and we thank him very, very much to be today with us. As you know, we'll have this morning session that will be more technical for future writers, aspiring writers, or producers, story editors, or what you will be. In the afternoon, a more general lecture about writing, etc. You know William Nicholson. He has been writing for different media, and this is, I think, a great strength and a great opportunity for us, because from his young age he wanted to be a novelist, and he started writing novels that he didn't sell for many years. That is a detail not to forget, because there are some people that say, well, I've written a novel, no one wants it. And then he moved to television and theater plays and cinema. He has continued writing novels. He has published around 10 novels, I think. He has been writing also for theater plays, 4 or 5 of them, and he has worked on a good number of very important films, and he has worked in very different ways, and this is also, I think, very, very good for us, because he has been rewriting something that had been written from some other writers. He has been adapting a musical. He has been writing from the beginning his own stories or his own films. He has had directed also one film that he had been writing, a film that was not fortunate at the moment, but if you go to IMDb, you see that the people there like it, and normally it's a very good signal, because there are many people who love cinema, who write and rate films in this database. So he has a very wide experience, and it's also, I think, one other thing that is very interesting for us, and is that he lives in England. So, and as you know, England for us is a very good connection. It's a very good way of being international without losing too much of being European. And in cinema and in television, in the last decades, they've been doing many films and also TV series that do not lose the subtlety and sometimes the depth that is more typical of the European. Also, there are very, very, very good and excellent American films. But they managed to be international, to go all over the world. So I'm sure this will be a very important morning for us. I thank again William Nicholson, and I sit down to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Armando. As I said when I first came in, if anybody wants, I don't have a speech, so I'm just talking. If anybody wishes to stop me and ask a question, please do so at any point. I want to be as useful to you as possible, and I can only do that if I know what you really want to know. But I'm going to start by giving you a general picture of being a screenwriter. Now, I think some of you are not going to be screenwriters. Some of you want to go into the production process. Is that true? How many people... How many people here would like to be screenwriters, would want to be screenwriters? Okay, thank you. And how many people want to go into production? Okay, much smaller number. Everything I say relates to both, because if you are going to become a producer, you need to deal with writers, of course. And it's very important to know how to do that. And in my experience, very few producers do know how to deal with writers. It's an area that is not studied or thought about, and this is one of the reasons why being a screenwriter is a very unpleasant and painful business. I'm afraid it is. It's because the people who make films have to find a lot of money. Even if it's a small local film, it costs a lot of money. And the producer and the team who get the money are very anxious that they'll lose the money. They're very anxious for their careers. The writer delivers a script. If they think the script isn't going to help them make money or make their career, they can be very brutal to the writer. So it's very instrumental. It's not like art. It's like commerce. And it's important that you understand that. And if you're a producer, you are in a commercial business, unless you are spending your own money. And even if you're spending your own money, you don't want to lose it. So it is a business, and writers entering the business are conducting a business activity. You are creating something like clothes in fashion or shoes or something like that. It must sell. If it doesn't sell, the company goes bust. And that is the bottom line that you must understand. If you don't like that, don't be a screenwriter. Go and be a poet. If you write poems or novels, nobody minds whether it succeeds or not, because it costs them no money. You write the poems, they print the poem in a magazine, it costs nothing. But any film, well, that's not quite true. Some films are very, very cheap. You can almost make a film now on an iPhone with yourself, almost for nothing. But that's a bit unusual. Most films are going to cost $1 million up in dollars. And the big films, you know, I've worked on films that have cost $200 million. And when people are spending money like that, they're not interested in the feelings of the writer. They're interested in results. Now, I just sort of tell you that as a general statement. You must understand that, and you must prepare yourself for working in a business with businessmen, even though they pretend to be artists. But that's not bad news, to be honest. I mean, I don't know too much about the Renaissance, but I'm sure that when one of the popes commissioned Michelangelo to paint his ceiling, he wanted a particular result. I'm sure he gave him a brief. I'm sure he said, it's got to be this, it's got to be that, it's got to be glorious, it's got to make me look good, you've got to do it this way. He didn't say to Michelangelo, Michelangelo, you're a genius, please do whatever you feel like. So I think we have perhaps you don't, but certainly in Britain, there's a slightly romanticized idea of the artist as somebody whose duty is to express his inner self, his inner truth. In the film business, nobody wants your inner self. Nobody cares about your inner truth. They want something that will work, will entertain, will make people go to the cinema and pay money. If at the same time it can be something that remains in the heart and the mind and the memory, then perhaps it'll become a great work of art. But you can't create it as a great work of art. You create it to entertain. Entertainment is a very big word. It's not a small word. If you think about the things that entertain you, it's actually very difficult. It means that you care about your audience's reaction. You do not say, as many artists in the visual arts say, I do what I do, the audience must come and find me. Some musicians say that, some what are called modern classical musicians. They say, I do what I do, if nobody listens, I don't care. And I find that a very strange way to behave. If you're an artist of any kind, you want an audience. You want a response. So for me, there's no difference between high art and low art. It's all a process of communication, of sharing experiences, which is what we do. So that's the broad picture. And it's important that you understand that, because it'll make you able to endure the process. And I'm sure it's the same in Italy as in England or as in Los Angeles, that it's collaborative. It's not a solo activity. The nearest you get to a solo activity in film is if you become a writer-director, which is a good thing to become. If any of you want control, become a writer-director. Direct your own script. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't say to yourself, oh, I don't know how to direct. If you know how to write, you know how to direct. It's all about creating and telling stories. So don't be ashamed or frightened. You may not know the technical sides of it. You don't need to know. When you become a director, you will have a cinematographer and you will have a first assistant director and a designer and a costume designer and a sound man. All these people know their job. What you do as a director is you tell them what you want. And that's really like being a writer. The writer is, in my opinion, the center of everything, because the writer produces the story. The director then puts it onto film. The actors perform it, the designers design it, the cinematographer photographs it. But it comes from you, the writer. So if you are the kind of person who has a strong ego, you wish to be famous in your own right, you wish to control your own work, you must become a writer-director. You must become like Woody Allen, say. That's a good ambition. It's not a stupid ambition. If it is your ambition, start now. Everything you write, imagine yourself directing it. Start directing. Get your iPhone out, find some friends who are actors, do some stuff in the street, put it on film. See your work come to life on film. It's really easy. You may discover when you do that you don't really like doing that. It's a lot of hassle, not creatively, it's a lot of hassle organizationally. To organize a film is a big, big labor. Directors work very, very hard. You may not be a genius director. I've worked with one or two directors who I think are geniuses at directing, in other words, at taking a scene and working out how to shoot it, how to place the actors, how to make the design work. Ridley Scott, who I've worked with, is like that. He's brilliant. But Ridley is not a storyteller. He doesn't know about story. That has to come from me or from another writer. He understands that. He began as making advertisements, commercials. He has an eye. Now if you become a director, a writer-director, you may be brilliant like that, but you may not be, and it doesn't matter. Not every film has to be a Ridley Scott film. It could be a film that is nothing but two people sitting in a room talking to each other. And if you've written something brilliant, that can be absolutely compelling. I was asked a long time ago to write a television film for the simple reason that the project that was going to occupy a particular slot collapsed, and they needed an urgent piece of work. They had, for stupid reasons, they had the crew, but they didn't have anything for them to shoot. And and it had to be very, very cheap. This was in 1987. So I said, if it's very cheap, if it's two people in a room talking to each other, but it must be very compelling, what could they talk about? This was at the time when AIDS had become a great fear in the gay community, but also when it was just beginning to be apparent that you could get AIDS through heterosexual sexual content. So I said, why don't we do a very simple story about a man who's married, happy marriage, but he's having an affair. He's a lecturer at a place like this, and he's had an affair with one of his students. And he hasn't told his wife, and they have a little child. And he hasn't told his wife because it's just a sexual affair. He doesn't believe it need interfere with his marriage. And one day, at the beginning of my story, he receives a postcard from this young lady who's left university. This all happened a year ago. It's all over. Saying, I have tested positive for HIV. You had better get tested. In those days, the HIV test took 5 days. You went and had your blood taken. It was 5 days before you knew. So the film begins with him getting the postcard, going and getting tested. There's now 5 days before he knows. He doesn't think it's likely, but it might be. In those 5 days, he's going to have to tell his wife. Because if he is HIV positive, maybe she is as well. Because, of course, he's been sleeping with her. So it's about this period of time when he has to tell his wife that he's had an affair, that he might be HIV positive, that she might be HIV positive, so his infidelity maybe has killed her. That's the sort of stark, worst possibility. That's all the story. So it's about those 5 days. And it's about a series of conversations in which he tries to explain to her. She says, you know, I don't understand. Don't you care about me? How could you do this? How, you know, did you not think that, etc. And little by little, he tries to tell her about male sexuality, about how men are, how it's possible to have a sexual affair with no emotional content in it whatsoever, and she doesn't believe, etc., etc. Anyway, so I wrote this very quickly. It was terribly simple. It was filmed with Liam Neeson and Miranda Richardson, and it was fantastic. It was absolutely compelling. People just said, what's she going to say? What's he going to say? And it ends with him getting his results, and he's not HIV positive, but by then the marriage is destroyed. And that's how it ends. And this was a TV film. That film got the best audience that BBC Channel 2 has ever had in history, in the past or the future, because of course now the channels are all fragmented, so you don't get big audiences anymore. But I give you that example just to say it was very, very simple, but the power is in the writing. And what do I mean by that when I say the power is in the writing? In the end, I think I mean truth. I think we are in the truth business. And that's difficult. If two people are going to sit and talk to each other, if a man, he was a lecturer, by the way, and his subject, one of his subjects was the Argentinian Dirty War, which I know quite a lot about, in 1976, when the regime in Argentina became very afraid of communists, and they started interning people who they thought were supporters of communism, or as they would say, terrorism. And they widened the web so that if they brought somebody in, everybody in his address book would also be brought in, and they tortured them. And they tortured them and then killed them, and 30,000 people were killed. And it was a horrible, horrible time because everybody in Buenos Aires knew it was happening and nobody spoke about it. This was the time of the disappeared. And this is his lecture subject. And in the course of these tortures, the normal thing they would do is we put a bag over the person's head before torturing them. And while my characters are talking to each other, you gradually get a kind of overlap between this idea of torture, anonymity, not dealing with real personalities, and sexual infidelity. So it becomes quite tense, and he, you know, after a bit he puts a bag over his head because he can't, it's actually a cushion cover, he takes the cushion cover, because he can't talk to her, looking at her in the face. But he says, gradually he tells more and more, he says, I want you to know the truth about what it is to be a man. Now, the power of that piece was all of that material. It wasn't really about AIDS at all. It was about male-female sexuality. And I think, I mean, I'm very proud of it, and I think its success was to do with the fact that a lot of people recognized that they were hearing something they don't usually hear on television, which is people telling real things instead of working out of some plot or something like that. So that means, if you're going to be a writer-director, if you're going to do something simple and cheap, it had better be really powerful. It had better be really true, because nobody's going to come and see it for the special effects. They're not going to come and see it because it's got a big film star in it. So why are they going to come? You have to ask yourself that. Why would anybody bother to see my film? There's got to be an answer. They're not coming because of you. It's no good you saying, but I'm a genius. You must see my film because I'm a genius, because they don't believe you. So you've got to have some reason. And the reason is the subject. It's as simple as that. So you must choose a subject that's more interesting than you are. which shouldn't be hard, because you're not interesting. So you must choose something that the minute you tell it to somebody, they think, I want to see that. I really want to see that. And a lot of people don't realise this. It's terribly simple. If you... there's a film just come out in England about the physicist Stephen Hawking, the one who's in a wheelchair and so on. And it's about his marriage. And part of what that film claims to show you is what is the brilliant thing that he discovered in physics. I've not seen the film. But that interests me. I'd like to know. Apparently the film doesn't really tell you, because it's not very clever about the science, which is a pity. I think it's good about the marriage, and a very good bit of acting by Eddie Redmayne, who was in Les Miserables, which I was involved in. But apparently it doesn't tell you that. Now, I wrote another TV film a long time ago called Life Story, and that was about the discovery of the structure of DNA. Pure science. I'm not a scientist. I was asked to do it. I looked at the story. It's about Crick and Watson, who discovered the double helix, if any of you know about that. It's how DNA works. A major scientific discovery which has led to all the genetic advances we've had since. Very important. I remember saying to the man who was making this film, who asked me to write it, I don't know anything about science. I'm so not interested in science, but I'm interested in beauty. And of course, scientists are interested in beauty. Scientists actually do pursue beauty. You'll often get a scientist say, that cannot be the right answer because it's ugly. There's a strong belief among scientists that the universe works in a way that is beautiful, which is interesting. I don't know if it's true. I constructed the entire story. I obviously became well informed about the science. I think if you watch that film, you will understand the science a little bit, because I really worked on it. I had a scientific advisor, but I constructed the story, which is about 4 people, 2 scientists in Cambridge, Crick and Watson, one of them's American, one's English, 2 scientists in London, Maurice Wilkins and Rosalind Franklin. And it's really about Rosalind Franklin, the story. She's the one who actually made the discovery, but she didn't realize she'd made it. And the discovery takes a visual form of a particular pattern of, it's a kind of X-ray. And it's on her desk when she's visited by the guys from Cambridge, and they see it, and they realize what they're seeing, and they don't tell her they've realized it, and they go back to Cambridge, and they build the model that produces the answer. So they've sort of stolen it from her, but she hadn't seen it. So the whole story is heading towards a climax, and the climax is Rosalind Franklin arriving in Cambridge to see this big model of DNA, and as she looks at it, she knows she's seeing the most beautiful thing she's ever seen in her life, and her career is over. And I like that kind of ending. It's tough, it's a victory ending, and it's a defeat ending. And I think that's a good way to end projects, stories, because we sort of know life is not all victory. But at the same time, who wants to go to a movie that comes out with everybody destroyed? So I like that combination. And I'm mentioning that to you partly to say that science can be made understandable, and partly to say that when you structure a story, in my opinion, you must know the ending. I don't believe you can write without knowing your ending. Because how do you know where you're going? So I do think that's important. And not only know your ending, but what emotion is your audience going to walk out of the cinema feeling? If it's a love story, are they going to end with the lovers getting together and the audience walks out happy? Are they going to end with tragic ending and the audience walks out weeping? It works both ways, but you've got to know, because it affects every single decision you'll make along the way. So what I thought I would do is just I mean, if this is useful to you, you must interrupt and tell me if you want me to be more specific. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about actually writing a screenplay. So this is fairly specific stuff. It's less useful for those of you who aren't going to be writers, but it'll give you an insight into what happens with writers, which is important, because if you're handling a writer, you can make that writer a better writer or a worse writer. Most producers don't understand this. They make writers worse writers by making the writers afraid. What you must do is the exact opposite, which is make writers feel safe and loved and trusted. If you do that, I mean, any of you know, if you feel safe, you take risks. And taking risks is what good writing is all about. If you don't feel safe, if you think that you're going to be criticized and attacked in a painful way, you try to give your producer what you think your producer wants. Your producer doesn't know what they want. They want a brilliant piece of work. They don't know what it is until they see it. That's fair enough. I don't know what it is. None of us know what it is. You've got to produce that. The producer has got to generate the atmosphere where that can happen, which is one of safety and love and attention and respect. Very few producers do that for their writers. Okay, that's for the producers. Now, for all of the rest of you writers, you will know what a frightening business it is, writing. When you write, it's really yourself. Even if you're writing about a space monster, it's really yourself. So as you write, you place yourself before whoever is going to read your work or make your work. So you're full of fears. Your fears are, I have no talent. Nobody will ever understand what I'm trying to do. I don't know what I'm doing. This is stupid. Why didn't I become a lawyer? All these things, you know, that you're afraid of. Will my parents turn out to be right after all when they said I'm wasting my time doing screenwriting? What will happen if I reach the age of 35 and I've done nothing? It'd be a bit late then to become a lawyer. What am I going to do? Start a cheese shop? You know. So there's many fears. And they're real fears. So the first thing you have to do as a writer is conquer your fears. Now, how are you going to conquer your fears? I think there are several things here. Do not think you are supposed to be perfect. You are going to make a mess. You're going to make a project that will proceed over time. You're not going to produce a perfect result first time. Nobody expects it. You should not expect it of yourself. You should start writing in a much more playful way, like a child having fun. You should release yourself to have fun, to write freely, to go on digressions, to have crazy ideas. This is the beginning of a process that will gradually become refined and edited. But right now, when you begin, it's all yours. You can do anything you like, and you should. So the way you stop yourself being frightened of doing that is you tell yourself, it's only the beginning, it's only like notes, it's almost like nobody's going to judge me on this. This is me playing. And you shouldn't be writing with a kind of little voice in your head, watching yourself, criticizing, saying, have I reached the Act 1 climax? Have I reached the point at which there's an initiating incident or any of this stuff? Forget all of that. You've got your characters, you've got your story. Run with it. Free yourself up. And all the time tell yourself, I know this is no good. Doesn't matter, I'll make it good later. You see? I'm free now to make mistakes. Now, in my opinion, you will find some of your best work will happen at this point because you've freed yourself up. You're suddenly thinking, why can't the monster come down from the sky? You know, Why can't the beautiful woman walk in the room naked? Whatever. Let's see what happens. Do it. And you're free because this isn't it. This is not something you're going to deliver. This is not something you're going to show to anybody yet. It's you having fun. So that's the very first thing you do. You push your fears to one side because you say, I haven't really started yet. Don't watch. You're speaking to your inner critic. Don't watch me. Go away. Just let me have fun. You write. You write fast. You don't agonize over every line. You can change it later. Write. Let it come spilling out. Do not be Flaubert. Flaubert would spend a week on one sentence. What a pain. You don't want to do that. You need the flow. You need the story to flow. You need the characters to flow. You need to discover how your characters are speaking. And you do that by moving almost at the speed of speech and the speed of action. Which is its hard way. So you do that for half the day, and then you stop. And you go and lie on a sofa, or go shopping. You don't write all day. It's not possible for the creative mind to function all day. You need time, which you won't even realize yourself, is actually story creating invisibly. So you've been writing, in my case I write in the mornings. You may be an evening person, doesn't matter. Whatever your pattern, there must be another part of the day when the battery is being recharged. And the recharging of the battery, it's partly energy, and it's partly ideas. Ideas are very curious things. Once you start on a story, it's as if all of you become sticky, if you understand me, and things stick to you that are relevant to your story. Suppose you're writing a story about adultery, everything, you start noticing your friends, things people are saying, things you read in the newspaper, things you see on the television that relate to your theme, because that's what you're thinking about. So you need a big chunk of the day when you aren't working, you think you're not working, but your subconscious is working. And it's soaking in new impressions that relate to your story. It's also, although you don't know it, processing the work you've already done. So when you come back to work the next day, a whole lot of stuff is there. You think, where did that come from? But it's come because you've allowed it time. And that's why you shouldn't be afraid to have a day job. If when you leave your course, you aren't immediately employed in the film industry, and you have to go and wait tables or be in a bar or whatever, that's okay. That could work very well, actually, because you're among people, and everything we do is about social interaction, actually. It's about people. So you need to be among people. You must not be in a garret, an attic. You mustn't hide yourself away in a lonely cabin by a lake where you can be a genius. You've got to be out there among people. You've got to be having the life that you will be able to write about, in my opinion. You can, if you like, take a week off to write intensively. It doesn't work for me. It does for some people. For me, if I take a week off, by the end of the first morning, I'm going mad, and I have to go and find a bar to talk to people. So, but I do believe in this process of write hard and fast, and then let yourself relax. I do literally lie down on a sofa and play music a lot of the time. I play radio music, so I don't know what's coming. And every bit of music produces a different emotion, as music does. So I lie there, and suddenly I'm thinking, I hear the Grand March from Aida or something, and I'm thinking, yes, that's what has to happen. Yeah, they've got to go boom, boom, boom. Why haven't I got that in my story? And it hadn't even occurred to me, but the music brings it to me. Or I hear some, haunting duet, and I think, yes, I need to establish two people who don't understand each other, who are speaking across each other, the way it can happen in a duet. I mean, that's a very obvious way music can inspire you, but music I find good because it's usually non-verbal. It's purely feelings for me. So I do a lot of that. My wife thinks I'm sleeping. I'm not sleeping. I'm mulling over things. So you have to... so then you've got a dirty draft, what I call a dirty draft. What I then suggest you do, by now you've got to the end of your first private dirty draft. I then suggest you tell somebody, a friend, a colleague, your story. Don't show them, just tell them. They'll say, what are you doing? Oh, I'm writing a screenplay. What's it about? Tell the story. Quite quickly. You know, it's no good if you tell them every single beat. They'll become bored. But just tell. And even as you tell them, you'll think, this isn't sounding good. They're not interested. It's not working. Before they've even spoken, the act of externalizing your own story gives you a different view of it. It's very strange. And the point of telling somebody is not to get their brilliant suggestions. They think that's the point of it. They will make brilliant suggestions. It isn't the point, and their suggestions won't be brilliant, and you'll know that. But you'll be polite. You'll say, oh, thank you, yes, very interesting. You'll forget about that. But the interaction with another mind receiving your story will have a profound effect on you. And you'll think, I realise now, I've not got it right, I've blown it. So you'll go back and you'll start the rewrite process. What I'm really saying is don't start the rewrite process without exposing your story somehow. If you're brave enough, you can show your screenplay. I say if you're brave enough because it can be very destructive. If you show it to somebody who you respect and who's very critical, it can kill your creative energy for that project. Sometimes that's right. Sometimes you've done something that's just gone down the wrong track, but usually I would say that's too early to be doing that. Better, as I say, just talk about it and respond. You'll find, by the way, when you talk about it, you know, you say, well, it's about this man who wakes up one day and he's a giant beetle, and your friend says, well, that's nonsense, I wouldn't believe that. And you want to say, well, you're an idiot, because it's a really good idea, and waking up as a giant beetle is great. But you walk away and you think, do you know, I wonder if it is a bad idea after all. So it's quite helpful. You'll be very defensive, but afterwards you'll allow these thoughts into your mind. So you then do your next draft, your next rewrite. And by now you're beginning to make a more polished version. I would say it'll take you at least 2 more rewrites before you're really ready to show it to anybody. But these, when I say rewrite, it's really writing. It's almost a longer part of the original process. It's just instead of getting it perfect with each scene as you go along, you're getting it imperfect in its totality, then a bit more perfect in its totality, and then as good as you can get it in its totality. So it's not exactly rewrites, it's a process of creating your first draft. When you get to that stage, when you've got something that you think is worth showing to your collaborators or whoever they are, you then face another problem, which is you now think it's as good as it's ever going to be. They are encountering it for the first time, and as far as they're concerned, it's at a very, very early stage. Just as an aside, as a screenwriter, this will happen to you again and again and again. You'll work on a project where you deliver something you've worked on a great deal to your development executives. They treat it as a first draft and they produce enormous comments to change it. You do all of that. It's then presented to a director. He treats it as a first draft. Everything can be changed. You do all those changes. A star actor comes on board. They treat it as a first draft. Everybody, when encountering something for the first time, has no realization of the body of work that has gone in to get it to that stage. They're very unimaginative. If they've been part of the process, it's very different. So your development executives or your producer to whom you show it after you think you've got it ready, to your shock, they treat it as a first draft, they say, this is wrong, that is wrong, but you're big and you're strong and you listen, you make changes. Your development executives then track you through the next drafts. By now they are implicit, they're complicit, they're part of the conspiracy because their views are being incorporated. The next load of people are not. I mean, to give you an example, I'm writing a screenplay at present for an English company called the Imaginarium, and this is, the key person is called Andy Serkis, and he is an actor who does a particular kind of performance, I think it's called motion capture, yeah. And so he was Gollum in Lord of the Rings, and he was Caesar in Planet of the Apes, and so on. So he has all these things put over his body, and yeah. He's become a kind of key guy for doing this kind of work. So his company, the Imaginarium, does a lot of fantasy pictures. I'm writing a fantasy picture for them. So I've been writing for Andy and his team in London. The money is coming via a company in Los Angeles run by a man called Peter Chernin, who used to run Fox and was Murdoch's right-hand man in film. Very powerful company, but a production company. And they have got the money from Fox, which is a studio. So we've got 3 layers. So I write my drafts for the Imaginarium people, and they read them, and I make changes. They then go to the Chernin people. The Chernin people, as far as they're concerned, they're seeing a completely fresh project. So they are going to, this hasn't happened yet, but they're going to put me through all sorts of changes. It's very irritating. And then when they pass it on to Fox, who are actually going to pay me, as far as they're concerned, they don't know anything about all these changes. All they know is they're getting something new. They are not pregnant with this project, so they have got to make all their changes as well. So this just happens all the time. It's hard. And you have to understand that unless people have travelled along the way with you, they regard themselves as starting every time from year 0. It's like Groundhog Day. You know, every new person who comes on board, it's like we're starting from the beginning again. And you honestly get driven nuts by this, but still, there's nothing you can do about it. So, I'm just talking about creating your stories. The last thing I want to say is, be bold. Be as bold as you can be. Take as many risks as you can. Do really, really exciting, unusual stuff. This is the opposite of writing a film that looks like another film that's already been successful. The temptation is to copy existing product. Your production team will think that way. They will say, well, what sort of thing is this? Is it The Sopranos? Is it The Godfather? Is it whatever? You know. Because that's the only way they can think. Your job is to be producing something that is not like anything that's come before. And that means even in a genre film, don't say to yourself, I'm writing it just like Alien, but I've got a different angle. You know, and there's a great temptation to do that, again, because of fear, because you want it to succeed, and without even realizing it, you internalize all the films you've seen, and you produce a sort of parody, you know, a sort of feeble copy. Try not to do that. Try to be bold and not to be scared at this early stage. They'll knock it all out of you later, I can promise you. So that's about how to write. About what you write, I've already said, pick a topic, a subject, a field that is inherently interesting. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but a lot of people don't. You say, somebody says, oh, I'm writing an original screenplay. I say, what's it about? well, it's hard to explain, but it's about a young guy and he's feeling alienated and he lives in a world where there isn't really a place for him. And, you know, and I'm thinking, why do I want to see this? So, of course, I may be wrong. You may write something that has no selling idea in it at all, but is brilliant. Absolutely, it can happen. If you're a genius. Not many people are geniuses. Most of us are pretty good, and we work hard, and we get a bit better. Particularly with the help of our collaborators, who make us better than we are. So, but if you are a genius, you could be a genius. I mean, take Charlie Kaufman. He's a screenwriter. Do you know about Charlie Kaufman, any of you? He's Being John Malkovich was his first big success. I'll tell you a story about that. I was sent a book to make a movie out of called The Orchid Hunters. Long time ago. I read this book and it was about a crazy guy who was stealing orchids. A true story. And I said, this isn't a proper story, I can't make this into a film. There isn't enough of a story here, so I don't want to do it. Sometime later I learned to my surprise that Charlie Kaufman was writing this adaptation of this book. So I thought, I wonder what he's going to do. He delivered his script to the studio, and they read it, and they said, this is absolute nonsense. We want our money back. Said to his agent, give, you know, this is such a disaster. Give us back all the money we've paid him, because he has completely failed at any level to write a movie. While that conversation was going on, the earlier film he'd written, Being John Malkovich, came out in the cinemas. And everybody said, this is a work of genius, which it is, by the way. It's wonderful. So the studio said, oh, maybe we've misunderstood. And they went back to the script. Said, oh, well, you know, he's the hot young genius. We'll make it. And they made it. It's called adaptation, the film. And Charlie Kaufman...
In Italy, the very different name, Il lato di Orchidee.
Okay.
The Italian title of the film was Il lato di Orchidee, that was the title of the book.
Okay. Well, the Charlie Kaufman's approach to this impossible brief, which I had refused, was to make a film about it being impossible to adapt the story, which is wonderful. I actually think adaptation is half a good film, not totally a good film. But he is a wonderful, wonderful writer. But of course, encouraged by this, dangerous, he went on to write his own next script, which he directed, and I can never remember the name. It's something like Schenectady, New York. Schenectady, New York. I don't know if any of you have seen it. I don't like it. I find it a bewildering muddle. So from my point of view, and I've met Charlie Kaufman, and he's a lovely, wonderful, brilliant guy. But I think, for my money, he's got a little bit too far away from the connection with an audience that I think you need. However, I'm only saying all of that to say, I think Charlie Kaufman probably is a genius. So if you're like Charlie Kaufman, pay no attention to anything I say, go your own way, follow your star, and, you know, who knows what will come out, something remarkable. But if you're just a working writer like me, then you must pay attention to your audience. And that means you must write about something that the audience wants to go to the movies to see, frankly. And, you know, they're willing to see quite a lot of things, but they may not want to see a movie about your lonely adolescence. But they might. So, subject matter. Very important. It's easy to test, by the way. Just say to people, I'm thinking of doing a film about Attila the Hun. You know, and if they say, woo, wow, woo, I'd like to see that, fine. If they say, I'm not bothered about Attila the Hun, maybe you've got the wrong subject matter, you know. Or you say, I want to do a movie about... I mean, have you seen the movie Her?
Yes.
Isn't it wonderful? Great film, great film. I can just imagine somebody talking about that and saying, It's about this guy who falls in love with the voice on the app. And you think, whoa, I want to see that, you know. I mean, difficult to do, very difficult, but they did it very well. So, choose your subject, test it out. I've just been asked to do a film about the Vikings. Vikings. So I think, why would anybody want to see a film about the Vikings? And then I thought, well, you know, these people in their day were the most feared killing machine in history. You know, they were so good at what they did, which was hit a coastal settlement and kill everybody. And, you know, it's not that easy to hit a coastal settlement and kill everybody. You've got to be really well organised, really well motivated. So I thought maybe the interesting thing here is to be inside a Viking unit and say, how do they do this? Well, that's interesting. Is it, you know, motivational speakers? Is it big swords? I mean, what do they do? How does it work? And, of course, you then have to have somebody in charge who's very good on the psychology of it, who understands that you've got your longboat, your longship, and you come in. And what you're really doing is inflicting terror. It's a sort of early version of terror. And the terror, you don't have to do much to create terror, but once you've got the terror, people will give you the money, which is what you're there for. And you don't actually have to do too much terrorizing. You just need a little bit to really scare people. So I thought, that's quite interesting. Maybe there's something... I don't know whether I'll do it, but I'm just giving you an idea of how subject matter, you've then got to interrogate the subject matter. Why would this matter to people today? Of course, I'm thinking Vikings and I'm thinking Islamic State, you know, how Islamic State is consciously creating terror with its videos. And it's a very effective tool. So, interesting. So you choose your subject matter and you then say, very important, what emotion am I going to generate with my story? Because in the end, all films succeed or fail on the level of emotional impact they have. There's a very small subset of films that work on an intellectual level, but most films work on an emotional level. And the emotion can be, obviously, laughter. That's a release emotion. Fear, awful lot of films work on fear. Love, revenge, anger, hatred. These are all powerful drives that your film will be channeling. So you have to say, what is this about? When I became the third writer on Gladiator, with two writers before me, and by the way, when you see writers' names on a credits list, it does not mean that those writers collaborated. It's like a marriage. There's a first marriage and a divorce, and a second marriage and a divorce, and a third marriage and a divorce. The ex-wives do not meet and do not like each other. They all believe that they are the real spouse. So I came on as third writer, and the story that I inherited was a revenge story. It wasn't working, and the cast had a rebellion and said, when they did the read-through, they'd been promised the script would be sorted out and it wasn't. So they all said, we're not going to do this film. Which is ridiculous, because they were all contracted. Of course they were going to do it. But it was a problem. So I was asked to solve the problem. And I read the script, and it was about a very great fighter whose wife and son are killed, and he is sent into slavery, and he becomes a gladiator, and his only aim in life is to kill the emperor, which is the story of Gladiator. But it was all about fighting. It was a boys' movie, and it was, you know, it's funny, too much fighting is dull. If you just have people killing each other all the time, but you have no investment in the characters, it's all right if you're 16 and a boy, but it's not much good beyond that. So my task was to create character, to create involvement, to create emotion. And they didn't understand that. All they knew was that there was something not working about it. But I read it and I said, I don't care about this guy. So they said, well, what do we have to do? And I said, well, it's very simple. He's got to be driven not by hatred, which in the end is an exhausting, negative emotion. He must be driven by love. So they said, well, who does he love? The sister of the emperor, who he seems to have some kind of thing with? Yeah, maybe. But I didn't see it that way. Now, here you have to understand, we all write from our own experience. I have never been a Roman general or a gladiator, so I don't have that experience. But at the time I had young children, and I'd been married a little while, and I was very strongly a father and a husband. I was a late person to marry. I was 40 when I got married. So the emotions of loving my wife and children were very strong in me. So I said, he loves his wife. Now the problem is, his wife dies quite early on. She's killed. So he can't spend the rest of it just saying, that's a bummer. I wish I got there sooner. So I said, well, we'll have an afterlife. That's what we'll do. He will believe in the afterlife. We'll fill the film with afterlife. And his dream is to die and be reunited with the one he loves. So this is a man heading towards his own death. And his own death will be his fulfillment. So that means he can kill the bad guy and still win, still be a lover, still go to his own death, and we can end the film feeling good about it. And that's what I did. So all the way through the film, there are these references to reaching beyond death. And it transformed the whole film. Suddenly, this is a character who women like. I often say to people, Russell Crowe, who was not a star before Gladiator, became a star because of Gladiator. And not just a star who, for a while, perhaps not anymore, represents the supreme ideal man, because he's strong, he will protect you, but he's tender and loving. It's that combination which any woman wants, of course. Why wouldn't they? So in my frustration, I sometimes say to people, I understand that. I understand you're all wetting your knickers for Russell Crowe, but actually it's me. I created that man. Come to me. But this doesn't happen. Because Russell Crowe isn't like that at all, as a man. He's like it in the part, but he is this thing called an actor, He's not the same thing. He's acting. So it's interesting how your own truths will flow into everything you write without you realizing it. And it's wonderful. Emotion. What emotion are you delivering? Identify it. Now, how does emotion get delivered? Through character. Simple as that. So you say, this is going to be a love story. So who are my lovers? Who are my characters? You must know your characters, of course. You must make your characters come to life. That's the beginning and end, really, of all writing. Make your characters come to life. If you're writing a thriller where people chase each other and you've got clever plot twists, you don't need so much character. That's not what I do. I write character. You can make it work. You can do a Bourne film or something like that, where it's plot twists and boom, 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 action. It's fine. It's good. It's quite difficult to do, actually. I believe in character, which means saying, who is my protagonist? Who is my central character? What do they want? Why can't they get it? How will they overcome that obstacle? How will it be resolved? Very simple. So, love story, my central character is a young woman and she loves somebody who isn't returning her love. What's going to happen? How is that going to change? How is the guy she loves going to suddenly realize that she's the one for him? And when he suddenly realizes, is the movie over? What's going to happen next? So you have to build in obstacles. But you must identify your main character. There's usually a main character and a secondary character. Even in a love story, usually one of them is actually the centre of the story. You're telling it from the point of view of one alongside another. I mean, in Brief Encounter, you're really telling it through Celia Johnson, you see, through the woman, even though the love affair has the both of them. So you identify your character, probably a single character, and you then build your plot. Now, the important thing here is you're building your plot after you've decided your character. And everything your characters do, which is plot, comes from their character. If you do it the other way around, if you create a plot, you think to yourself, I know, I've got a really clever twist in my plot, and then your characters come along afterwards. Well, I'll give you an example, a film which has been recently out. I don't know what it's called in Italian, Gone Girl. Have you seen that?
It's
Got
their
the
teacher.
Ben Affleck, yes. Has it been released in Italy? Not yet.
Oh, it's not been released yet. Okay. Well, I won't tell you the plot because it's a very clever plot, a very good plot, and it's a very enjoyable film, and made by David Fincher, and you'll enjoy watching it. But in my opinion, it's a perfect example of a film where the plot drives the characters. The result of that is that you really enjoy the plot. It's a very surprising plot. I don't think you'll guess unless you've read the book. There are several turns it takes. Wonderful. By the end, when you leave the cinema, you think, I really enjoyed that. Excellent piece of entertainment. And then, while you're having your pizza and your glass of red wine and you're talking to your girlfriend, you say, but you know what? I don't think marriages are like that. I don't know anybody like that. And the more you think about it, the more the whole thing falls apart. And you start to realize that what you've watched has been a sort of Sudoku. It's a kind of clever bit of slotting in of elements, but it has no relation to anything real. So the emotions you've been caused to feel have been synthetic, and they evaporate. So for me, it's a very good example of a film where the plot was built before the characters, and the characters were slotted into it, and therefore the characters are required to do things which I don't believe they would do. A lot of cinema goers don't realise when they go to the cinema why a film is not working. But that's always why. It's because characters are doing things that somewhere inside you think they wouldn't do that. You know how annoying it is when there's something frightening outside and the heroine, and you're saying, don't open the door! It's bad out there. And she opens the door, stupid woman. And the monster comes in. I mean, that's not good plotting. Good plotting is you realise she has to open the door because her child is outside or whatever. So, and the kind of movie when you're being manipulated by the plot is the kind that can be fun at the time, but it's like candy floss. I mean, there's nothing there. There's no substance there. So character first, then plot. So if your character this is about a man who is unable to make an emotional commitment to a woman, to give you an example. He's somebody who is afraid of making that final commitment to marriage, whatever, because he tells himself, I want to be free. He's a free spirit. He doesn't want a woman to tie him down. He wants to have affairs, he wants to have relationships, but the minute they start demanding, he says, it's over, I go off to the next one. But you think about your character, you think, why is he doing this? He's doing this because inside himself he's afraid. He's afraid that if he commits himself in love to one woman, and that woman either rejects him or goes away or dies, the pain will be unbearable. And he doesn't want that pain. Why doesn't he want that pain? What's happened to him? When he was 10, his mother died. And the pain was so unbearable. He's shut himself off ever since. So he's a wonderful guy, and perhaps he has lots of relationships, but he's not going to let anybody get that close to him ever again. That's my character. This is the basis of a film I wrote called Shadowlands. This character didn't want emotional commitment. And it's the story of somebody like that being ambushed into emotional commitment by a series of events that he doesn't expect and isn't defended against, and he ends up making that commitment, and the woman he loves dies, and he is left with the pain, exactly as he feared. But the message of the film is, it's worth it. Now that's a structure built entirely on character. You see how you've got the character, you then immediately realise how your structure must go. Quite often, if you've got your character clearly in your mind, the plot writes itself. Certainly the dialogue writes itself, if you know your character, because you just put your character in the situations you want, and you know what they're going to say, because you know the character. So you've got your subject, your emotion, your character, your plot. You better write it down. You better write out a structure. It doesn't need to be big, but this is what I mean when I say you need to know your ending. So you write it out. When I write it out, it's usually 2 pages, maybe 3. I mean, just like this, but a couple more. And it's very, very broad. It's just the rough journey you're going to go on. But it's very important. You're not producing a sort of shapeless effusion. You're not waiting for genius to come pouring out of you. You're building a house. You're a builder. And you know that the walls have got to go up because you can't have a roof without walls. And then the roof's got to go on because you can't do the interior while the rain comes in. So you've got to work the thing in a proper professional way. So you lay out your structure. You do not have to stick to this. Ever. It can all change, but you lay out your structure. You look at that structure, which is still a fairly simple thing, and you say, how am I going to complicate it? And the complications are the subplots and the minor characters. And those you can have fun with, but it's worth at this stage thinking, who are the minor characters? I mean, very few stories are as simple as my AIDS story. Most of them, you'll go to other characters, other things will happen. It all enriches the world you're building. So you see, well, who are they? I mean, in the case of my emotional commitment phobe, he's a professor at an Oxford college. So there's the world of the Oxford College I can create. He's got a brother. What's the relationship with the brother? What happens there? So you start to say, I'll pop that in there, pop that in there. You may not know at this stage exactly how you're going to use the minor characters or the subplots, but be aware of them. Think about them. So that as you write, at the point at which you think, I've had a very intense scene, I must change the emotional temperature, I must have a light moment or a visual moment, then you've got to have somewhere to go to. So you think, why don't we go to the Oxford College? Why don't we have the choristers singing a beautiful, in King's College, choir, and it'll give us this moment when the strong emotions from the previous scene can be allowed to settle and then rise because there's a musical moment. That's the sort of way you might be thinking. So you've got to have your subplots. So you've then got all your material.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Speaking of Shadowlands, the subplot with the student, it was a suggestion of some producer, it was an idea of yours. was not in the play, in the theatre play.
That's correct. It wasn't in the theatre play. When I came to write this film's script for Shadowlands, I'd written a play already, and in fact a TV before that. The film project was bought by Columbia to make a film with Sidney Pollack to direct. He's now dead, but he was completing at that time a film called Havana with Tom Cruise, set in Cuba. He came over to England. He's past tense. He flew his own jet to England, and he came to my house, and we put him up in a local hotel. But for 3 days, he worked with me in my house on the script. And what he said to me was, this is wonderful, but it's too much about what it's about. You need a bit of misdirection, if you like. Interesting note. So I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, another plot that will take us away from the main one, but also reflect on it. So I said, okay. So I then devised the plot of a student, because I wanted to have scenes where the professor is teaching, and to make it more interesting, you have to have a character he's teaching who you get to know. And this is a student who is, he's disenchanted with the academic process. He comes from a poor family. He's beginning to think it's all a waste of time. It's a sort of masturbation, all this talking about literature, which is, of course, my hero's life, talking about literature. So that gave me an interesting little aside plot, and the way what I wanted to use it to show, I mean, what's the purpose of a subplot? It's not just to get a bit of difference. It's to throw a new light on your main character. And I wanted to show that he was a very good teacher. So that you would admire him, even though he was a very failed lover. And so you realise that in this little plot, our main character has got a challenge. How to make this student re-engage with the life of the mind, with books. He discovers the student stealing books from the local bookshop, which gives an opportunity for something very important, which is a character moment that is plot, really. He goes to him, and the student thinks he's going to be disciplined for this, but our hero says no. You know, that's up to you. Do what you like. But he realizes that the student actually cares about books enough to steal them. And the student at one point says to him, in fact, this is quite an amusing point. There's one line in the film, written by me, invented by me, when the student says, I don't get the point of books. And the hero says, we read to know we're not alone. Now, this is all over the internet, this line, and everybody thinks C.S. Lewis, who's my character, who's a real person, C.S. Lewis, wrote it. And I'm often getting questions on the internet, where did he write this? And I have to say, I'm sorry, he didn't. I wrote it. And it's gradually spreading across Twitter and the internet that this is me, which I'm very pleased about. We read to know we're not alone, which I believe, by the way. So that subplot was forced on me, or the need for a subplot, by Sidney Pollack. So Sidney was then very happy with the script, but meanwhile his film Havana came out and was a failure. He was, I should say also, by the way, when he was planning to shoot Shadowlands, his plan was Sean Connery and Barbara Streisand would be the main actors. This is because Sidney was what we call a star fucker. He basically believed in stars. He thought, you've got to have stars. Would have been terrible casting. I've met Sean Connery several times since, and he says, why didn't you cast me in that? You know, he wanted to be a professor. Wouldn't have worked. Very good actor. So Sidney's film came out and failed, and he got frightened. And he was scared to do Shadowlands, which is not a big film. And he took on another film called The Firm instead. So we said, well, wait a minute, when are you going to do our film? And he said, well, I'll get to it. And basically we said to him, will you please, either say you're definitely going to do it or no, so we can take it elsewhere. And he said, I can't tell, it's so difficult. So we took that as a no. And we took it away from him, and Richard Attenborough took it on, and he took the script as finalised for Sydney by me, and got Anthony Hopkins and Deborah Winger. They went into production, and the next thing I knew, I was nominated for an Oscar. And that was my first film. And I thought it was easy, but it's not easy. It's never been like that since, I can tell you. But that is what happened in that story. So I'm telling you about the writing process. I've spoken to you about when you do your first draft. You've got your structure. When you do your first draft, I've already spoken about write fast, write dirty. In fact, I've said all this. Get somebody to react to it. When you eventually are ready to show your work, and I would recommend you don't take too long about it. The longer you take, the harder it'll be to show. If you wait 9 months, you'll be a jelly by the time anybody looks at it. You shouldn't take more than 3 months, you really shouldn't. Because this is only the beginning. I would say 6 weeks is a better time. Then you show it to your collaborators, to your producer, the development team, it depends who you're working with. And then you have the difficult business of listening to criticism. And this is where those of you who wish to be producers, this is important. If after this you go on my website, which is williamnicholson.com, you'll find there's a little thing called A User's Guide to Screenwriters. And it's for the users, which is the producers. And when I have anybody who hires me, I say, you better read this first. And it's telling them how I want them to handle me. It's kind of simple, really. We writers want to be properly informed. We want to be respected. We don't have to be told that we've done a good job. That's okay. But we want to feel that we're being taken seriously. And the way you don't take writers seriously is by not informing them, by receiving their draft, not responding for 4 weeks. What do you think the writer's doing during those 4 weeks? You know, they're reaching the point of suicide. They don't hear. They don't hear. The phone doesn't ring, the email doesn't come. What's going on? Obviously, they think it's so terrible, they can't say anything. In practice, that's not true. In practice, they're busy, they're doing other things. They're not thinking about you and your process and your feelings. They're thinking about their job and all the pressures that are on them. And that's wrong. When you receive, if you're a producer or a developer, when you receive a draft, reply immediately saying, I've received it, I'm really looking forward to reading it. Give some indication of when you will respond. You say, I'm very busy, I have to go to the Philippines, I won't be able to give you a response for 4 weeks. Fine. Or, I'm hoping to read it next weekend. I'll call you Monday. Fine. Whatever. But whatever you do, do it. Because this is somebody's psyche and the balance. You know, you can destroy these people mentally, these writers. I mean, it's a fragile business. So you respond, you say, I will give you my... So then the next stage is, here come my thoughts. In the business, they're called notes. A lot of notes are written within a company for the people in that company. And it never occurs to them what it'll look like when the writer reads them. So the notes say things like, this project has got off to a shaky start. We think we've got something potentially good here, but for the present, it lacks pace, the characters are unconvincing, the climax doesn't work, you know. And that's for the people within the organisation to... But the writer reads this, and it's devastating. Devastating. So you don't give those notes to the writer. Come in. Want to come in? Don't give those notes to the writer. Give special notes to the writer. And the special notes say, this is wonderful. You've done something tremendous here. You've done this that's good. We love the scene with the dog. We think that the main character really comes to life. But, and then you say the criticisms, obviously. Then you say, but we think that with the next draft, we can make it even better. That's what you have to say. I know it seems stupid. You think, why should people be so fragile? Why can't they just take it on the chin? Well, we can't. So, be gentle with your notes. Be thoughtful, be respectful. Create this atmosphere I spoke to you about of safety and trust, where experimentation is possible. If you think it's absolutely terrible, sack the writer. Okay. Don't prolong the agony. You ring up the writer and what you say is, you know what, it's our fault, we failed to communicate our brief clearly enough. This is one of those things that sometimes happens. I'm sorry, we want different things, go with God. And if you are in the normal screenwriting business, you've been paid, it's not so terrible, and you go. But if you're going to go on working with that writer, do not wound that writer mortally. Make that writer think that they can do it. Otherwise, why are you carrying on? Very, very important. And you, yes?
When you finish this part, we can do maybe a break of 10-15 minutes.
Oh my goodness. I've been talking for a long time. I can stop at any point. Shall I stop now? And we can have a break. Yeah, because it just goes on and on and on.
15 minutes.
Okay. Is this useful? Is this the kind of thing you want?